Welcome to Graffiti Topics Off the Top, where I discuss topics from the graffiti world right off the top of my head. And like always, if there's something you guys want me to speak on, drop it in a comment. But let's get into topic one. In the last couple of days, I've added some more topics, including some of the ones that you guys have asked me to speak on. So let's see what pops up. Did I notice graffiti after I stopped tagging? I stopped tagging in 1998 when I got pretty burnout on life, and I'm going to talk about that whole process at a later date. But I can tell you guys, after I was done tagging, I still noticed graffiti for a few years. And this continued on into the 2000s, and some of the people that I was writing with, or some of the people that I knew from my time, were still active in the 2000s, including people like C4, so it was still really dope to see them up and still see them doing their thing. But as time went on, I paid less and less attention, especially as I got into my 20s. I picked up adult concerns, I was working a full-time job, I was trying to figure out all the stuff that had happened in my life, and graffiti got further and further pushed into the background. I can also tell you guys, in my 20s and in my early 30s, I still had a lot of shame about a lot of the stuff that I had done. This included a lot of the criminal stuff that I did, and I felt like graffiti was included in this, and anytime I would think about it, I would just be ashamed. So this means I missed out on a lot of stuff starting in the mid-2000s. I missed out on the last days of bus hopping, I missed out on the rise of the crew BKF, I missed out on the rise of the crew FN, which included people I knew, and there was just a lot of things going on, a lot of talented artists coming out and making themselves known in the 2000s and in the early part of the last decade, and I just missed all of it. And during my last few years in San Francisco, I could be walking by a wall, see some Graff, and it just stopped registering. However, there was still an attraction that I had to graffiti, and a nice piece that I would see would always bring me a lot of positive feelings. And despite all the shame and all the things I was torturing myself about, I still had good memories about Graff. But I still pushed it away, I didn't want to be fully involved, I never thought I'd be ever involved again in graffiti, and all that changed as soon as I started making videos. When I first got on YouTube, I would talk about history, I would talk about politics, I would talk about my life, I would just talk about the things that I was interested in. This also included talking about Graff from the 90s, and as I talked about Graff more people wanted me to speak on it more. On my end, I didn't expect this to happen, and as I talked about Graff more and more, I found myself growing more and more close to it. And as I become more connected, I've also become more aware of what's going on in the Graff world, not just in San Francisco, but all throughout the world, period. If I regret anything at this point in my life, it's not tagging more, and seeing some Graff and doing some Graff connects me back to myself and back to that magical time in the late 90s. And as I think about this topic a little bit more, I wonder if some of you guys out there went through something similar. And if you yourself ever stopped writing for any reason, let me know down in the comments if you just disavowed yourself completely or if you kept an eye to the scene. But let's get into topic two. And let's see what we got for the second topic. Was I doing throw-ups and pieces? During my first go-around as a tagger, I almost entirely bus hopped and just hit up hand styles. But towards the end of my time as an active writer in the 90s, I was starting to get into these more advanced things. And while I started doing throw-ups around that time, I never got into doing pieces. And there's two good reasons why I didn't get into doing pieces in the 90s. First and foremost, for me, paint was incredibly hard to come by. And if I had one can on me at any given time, that was a lot. But more than anything else, it was very difficult for me to sneak out of the house and be somewhere for a couple of hours doing a piece. That's not to say I wasn't practicing, that's not to say that almost every day I wasn't sketching something down and working out styles, but I just didn't have too much of an opportunity to just go out there and do something like that. And for the fools that were around my age, there was only a couple of us that were even really going in that direction. The homeboy E, he could do pieces even before he started tagging. And his parents would cop him some paint and he would just do kind of murals in his backyard, and his skills were already top rate as a guy that was only 13 or 14 years old. The homeboy C4 was in a similar boat, and when I met him in 1995, he already had the ability to do pieces, but I'm not sure if he was or not. As for the rest of us, if we got a chance to do a throw-up, if we even had a chance to get a can, that was something to be remarked on. It was damn near something to be celebrated. But pretty much everybody I tagged with was committed to bus hopping, to hitting up those one flows and crushing bus lines, and that was graffiti to us. However, as somebody my age now who's a grown man with a car, with the ability to just go anywhere I want and get as much paint as I want, am I doing pieces now? And the answer is no. And more than anything else, that's because hitting up hand styles just connects with me in a very special way. In topic 1, I talked about shame and I talked about how I distance myself from these things I used to do. But going and just hitting up a hand style, feeling that rush, just feeling that connection to those times is just good enough for me. That's not to say I don't sketch now. That's not to say that I'm not drawing from time to time and just working out styles as I was back in the 90s. But there's really no way for me to replace that feeling that I get hitting up a hand style and getting up out of somewhere. And I don't think that's gonna change anytime soon. But I can add, anything is possible, and I haven't ruled out going out there and doing something a little bit more elaborate. But at the end of the day, graffiti to me is about self-expression. It's about finding what you have in your soul and putting it out there on a wall, on a bus, on a garbage can, wherever. And instead of acting contrary to that as I did when I wasn't writing, I'll always act in concert with it now. And acting in concert means hitting up some hand styles and busting some one flows. And shout out to everybody doing pieces, doing throw-ups, doing their thing and expressing themselves and just exercising that part of themselves that needs to see themselves up. And in my opinion, that's the most important thing to me, and whatever anybody else thinks about it, who cares? But let's get into topic 3. Graffiti writers and street people. As a graffiti writer, one of your most natural allies out there in the streets are the people living on them. And one way to interpret this is, you can step to somebody that's living on the street that maybe doesn't have a lot of money, and you can pay them to be a lookout. But that's not what I'm talking about, and to be honest with you guys, I look at doing stuff like that as pretty exploitative. And there's other ways that graffiti writers exploit folks living on the streets and maybe dealing with issues related to substance, and that is asking this person if you can paint on them. And I definitely don't mean any of that when I say that street people are the graffiti writer's best ally. Graffiti writers have to understand that the general public doesn't see a hell of a lot of difference between people who sleep on the street and people who tag on the streets. We're definitely both considered outcasts. Many of us come from poverty ourselves, and a lot of people would just like for us to disappear or to be locked up somewhere. And instead of trying to exploit people or use your monetary advantage to humiliate somebody, I think when you see somebody out there living on the streets, sleeping on the streets, you just need to treat them with respect. And personally, in my neighborhood where I grew up, I knew most of the people that were long-term sleeping on the streets. I break them off with a little bit of money. My mom would definitely do the same. And I never needed the help of any of these people to look out for me or warn me of something about to happen. I want folks that are of a common background, that are coming from the same struggle, to be united, but not to use these little things like I live in a house and you don't, or I have money and you don't, as a way to humiliate people and exploit them. That's what really rich people are doing already, and you don't want to do just a minor junior version of something that's going on right now. And more than anything else, some of these people that are living on the street might have been taggers themselves, and this person that you might otherwise look down on might be able to teach you something about life or even teach you something about Graff. But if you exploit this person or harangue this person or disrespect this person, something really messed up could happen to you. But also you should remember that life has a lot of surprises in store for all of us, and life can take you in a lot of different directions. And it's not impossible for you to clown somebody and then maybe 5 years later end up in the exact same situation that they're in. And if you'd like to hear the perspective of a graffiti writer who was living on the streets, I very much recommend watching this interview with Gray. But let's get into topic 4. And let's see what we have for this 4th topic. Best things about San Francisco graffiti in the 90s. Joining crews. Joining a crew in 1996 is what led me to tagging in the first place. There was a lot of guys that I knew from elementary school that were all forming up together, and they were all starting to tag around the same time. And this entry of mine into the graffiti world through a crew, and especially through a crew of my friends, really flavors my experience as a graph writer. And with there being so many writers in the mix, naturally there were a lot of crews in the city. And getting to know new writers and getting to join up together, move in the same direction, and go out and bomb together is one of my favorite things about tagging in the 90s. And all throughout the time that I tagged, I probably belonged to 5 or 6 crews. And while some of these crews overlap with each other, I got to meet some new folks when I would join a new crew, and my recognition level would rise when I would join some of these more well-known and more established crews. This was especially the case when I joined NBK around the time that I stopped tagging. NBK was mostly a bus hopping and bombing crew, but they were up in a lot of parts of San Francisco, and I just had my name attached to something that was bigger than me and greater than me. But more than anything else, it was this collective feeling of we're all in this together. It's all these different types of people, and we all have the same common goal, and that's go bomb. And while you can go out and bomb by yourself, and a lot of people do, especially nowadays, I just can't overstate how much that collective feeling, if you've never felt that, if you've never felt like you were on the same page with a bunch of different people, if you never felt the feeling of having a bunch of different types of people all moving in the same direction towards the same goal, I recommend you try it. And it doesn't have to be a graffiti thing. There's clubs you can join, there's unions you can join, there's a lot of different things, especially in current times, that you could be a part of that'll give you that feeling. But when you add in that extra element of Graff is not legal and it's looked down upon, it makes that solidarity between us all the more stronger. And some of what I understand now about how groups come to be, how they exist, how they dissolved, was learned during my time as a graffiti writer. And as somebody that's constantly looking to just understand the world, to understand different group segments and how they affect my life and everybody's life, having this starting point as a graffiti writer has helped me out greatly. But even if I put all this to the side and say that this doesn't apply to me, there's just still something to be said, as I've talked about before, about getting together with everybody and everybody coming together and bombing. There's just a feeling that you get, and there's memories that I have that can't be bought and they can't be replaced, and I only have them because I joined crews.